Furry Collar. Julia and Geraldine were best friends, but they had very different personalities. Julia was brave and fearless, while Geraldine was shy and frightened of everything. It was Halloween night and the girls were having a sleepover at Geraldine's house because her parents were out of town. In fact, every time Geraldine's parents went out of town, they had a sleepover because Geraldine was nervous about sleeping alone in the house, even though she knew there was nothing to be afraid of. It was a big, gloomy house, set way back from the road. When Julia arrived and rang the doorbell, Geraldine answered the door and ushered her inside. The girls changed into their nighties. Julia was wearing a beautiful silk nightgown. It was blood red and had a furry collar. Geraldine thought it was gorgeous and wished she had such a beautiful nightgown. The girls made some popcorn and settled down on the sofa to watch a scary movie. When it was over, Julia was tired and Geraldine was a bit scared, so they decided to turn off the TV and go to bed. As they walked up the stairs, they got the strangest feeling that something was following them. They ran upstairs and slammed the bedroom door. Then, they laughed at each other for being so silly. It was shortly after midnight and the two girls were lying in bed, chatting. All of a sudden, they heard a faint noise from down below. It sounded like something was moving around down there. Scritch, scritch, scritch. They stopped talking and looked at each other, wide-eyed. There was an uneasy silence. Then, they heard the noise again. It sounded like fingers scraping down a chalkboard. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Julia sat up in bed, listening intently. Geraldine hid her head under the covers. "It's only a cat," Julia whispered. "I'm going down to see." "Don't," Geraldine begged. "Please don't leave me, Julia." "Don't be so childish," Julia snapped. "Whenever anything fun happens, you get the shivers down your spine." "Please," Geraldine whined. "If you're so frightened, I'll lock the door from the outside and take the key with me," Julia assured her. "That way no one can get in. I hope it's a burglar. I'll give him the fright of his life." Julia got out of bed and felt her way to the door in the darkness. She slipped out into the hallway and quietly closed the door behind her. Geraldine listened as she turned the key in the lock. She heard Julia's soft footsteps going down the stairs. Then, she heard the noise again. It sounded like a knife being sharpened. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Geraldine lay there in the darkness with the bedclothes over her head. She was sick with fear and trying to be as quiet as a mouse. All she could hear was the very stillness of the house. She wanted to call out Julia's name, but she didn't dare. Geraldine waited for what seemed like an eternity. After a long silence, she heard the noise again. It seemed to be moving now, coming up the stairs, getting louder and louder. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Then, it stopped. Geraldine thought she heard someone standing on the other side of the door. Scritch, scritch, scritch. She heard the key turn in the lock and the door creaked open. "Julia?" she asked. "Julia, is that you?" She couldn't see a thing in the darkness, so she reached out with both hands. She reached out and felt a soft silk nightgown. Then, Geraldine reached up higher and, to her relief, she felt the furry collar. It must be Julia, she thought. But when she reached higher again, she felt something wet and warm. There was nothing there. Nothing but a bloody stump where her friend's head had once been. Early the next morning, When Geraldine's mother and father returned home, they were shocked by what they found. Inside the front door, there was a large pool of blood and a trail of blood drops led up the stairs. The frantic parents rushed upstairs, following the trail of blood that led to their daughter's room. When they opened the door, the poor couple stood there appalled at the loathsome sight that met their eyes. Julia's headless body was stretched out on the floor. They found Geraldine hiding in the closet. Her hair had gone white and she was babbling and raving like a lunatic. She had gone completely insane. Later that day, the police found a confused man wandering around the countryside. He was dressed in a white hospital gown and he had blood all over him. In his hand, he was clutching a bloody knife. It turned out that he was a homicidal lunatic and, just the night before, he had escaped from the local insane asylum. Ironically, it was the very same insane asylum where Geraldine would spend the rest of her life. Girl in the Mask. There was a little girl named Holly who had just turned 6 years old. One Halloween night, her parents decided to celebrate their wedding anniversary by going out to a nice restaurant for dinner. Because it was Halloween, they had some trouble finding a babysitter for their daughter. Eventually, they called a teenage girl named Jessica, who lived down the street, and asked her if she could babysit for them. When Jessica arrived, the parents gave her their mobile phone number and told her to call them if there was an emergency. After they left, the babysitter fixed Holly some dinner and then sat down on the sofa to watch TV. When Holly finished eating, she asked, "Can I have some dessert?" "Okay," replied Jessica. "What would you like?" "Ice cream," said Holly, smiling from ear to ear. The babysitter got up and searched through the fridge. "I can't find any ice cream here," she said. "It's in the freezer in the basement," said Holly. Jessica opened the basement door and flicked the light switch, but the lights didn't turn on. She carefully made her way down the creaking steps into the basement. She eventually found the freezer and lifted the lid. As she took out a tub of vanilla ice cream, she happened to glance out the window. In the darkness, she saw a little girl with long blonde hair standing outside. The girl had a red t-shirt on and was standing with her back to the window. Jessica couldn't see her face, but she noticed that the girl was wearing something black on her head. The babysitter didn't pay much attention. It was Halloween night and there were a lot of children wandering around the neighborhood. She made her way back upstairs, put some ice cream in a bowl and placed it in front of Holly. The little girl made a face. "Can I have some chocolate syrup on it?" she asked. "Okay. Where is that?" asked Jessica. "In the basement," Holly replied. Jessica dutifully made her way back down into the darkened basement. As she was searching for the chocolate syrup, she glanced out the window again. The little girl was still standing outside, but this time, she was facing the window. Jessica saw that she was wearing an unusual mask. It was black with red trim and the mouth was covered in large, sharp white teeth. It gave Jessica the creeps. The babysitter retrieved the chocolate syrup and walked back up the creaking stairs. In the kitchen, she poured the chocolate syrup on Holly's ice cream. "Thanks," said Holly. "Can I have some candy sprinkles on it too?" Jessica sighed. "Let me guess. They're in the basement." "Yeah," giggled Holly. The babysitter headed back down the stairs, into the darkened basement. As she rifled through the cabinets, she looked out the window and saw the same little girl in the mask standing outside. This time, the child was holding a large knife in her hand. Jessica became very uneasy. She tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was part of the little girl's costume. However, it seemed odd that a child's parents would allow her to go around at night armed with a knife. Shuddering, Jessica found the candy sprinkles and ran up the stairs, taking them 2 by 2, anxious to get out of the basement. "Thank you," squealed Holly happily as the babysitter shook the candy sprinkles on her ice cream. "All it needs now is a cherry on top." Jessica stared at Holly in irritation. "Are you sure that's all it needs? This is the last time I'm going down into that basement." "I promise," grinned Holly. The babysitter slowly descended into the darkness and opened the cabinet and found the cherries. Looking out the window, she noticed that there was no sign of the creepy little girl in the mask. Jessica breathed a sigh of relief. She was glad the girl was gone. The whole situation was beginning to freak her out. She picked up the package of cherries and climbed up the stairs for the last time. As she entered the kitchen, she was greeted by a horrible sight. Holly lay face down in her bowl of ice cream. A pool of blood was spreading out around her on the table. Her little throat had been sliced open. Jessica screamed and dropped the cherries. She ran into the bathroom and locked the door behind her before dialing 911. She sat on the floor, tears streaming down her cheeks, desperately waiting for the police to arrive. After what seemed like an hour, she heard sirens outside and the sound of the front door being broken down. A policeman's voice called out to her and she unlocked the bathroom door. The police searched the house, but there was no trace of any intruder. A few minutes later, Holly's mother and father arrived. They were horrified to see their young daughter's corpse being carried out on a stretcher. The father sat on the steps outside, his head cradled in his hands. The tearful mother approached Jessica. Her eyes were red from crying. "What happened?" asked the mother. "Oh God. I'm so sorry," said the babysitter, trembling with emotion. "I was down in the basement. I looked out the window. There was a little girl in a mask. She had a knife. She was just standing there outside the basement window. She must have murdered Holly." "But Jessica, that's impossible," said the mother. "There aren't any windows in the basement. Only a mirror." Bubble bath. Jennifer was sitting at the desk in her bedroom, finishing up her homework. She had an exam the next day and needed to study. As she was searching for one of her school books, she received a text message on her cell phone. She didn't recognize the number, but the text read, "Take a bubble bath and go to bed, it's a school night, Mom." She probably ran out of credit and texted me from someone else's phone, thought Jennifer. She had already been planning to take a nice, relaxing bubble bath soon anyway, so she undressed, grabbed a clean towel and walked into the bathroom. She stopped in her tracks, surprised. The bathtub had already been filled to the brim. That's strange, she thought. I guess Mom filled it in advance. Shrugging her shoulders, Jennifer dropped the towel and climbed into the bath. Her whole body was submerged before she became aware of a burning sensation all over her skin. Within seconds, the burning feeling got worse and worse until she was crying out in agony. She jumped out of the bath, but it was too late. To her horror, she saw the water stained red. Blood red. The skin on her arms and legs was beginning to peel off. She looked at her leg and the skin there was peeling off too. Then her chest and stomach began to peel. All the skin on her body was coming off. Pieces of her skin fell to the floor and she started screaming in pain. Her blood formed a puddle around her on the bathroom floor. In terrible pain, Jennifer opened the door of the bathroom and hobbled out. She made her way to her bedroom. Every step was agony. She left a bloody trail along the carpet. She picked up her cell phone to call the police, but there was a new text message waiting for her. It read, "Next time, bathe in water." Jennifer heard laughter behind her and turned around to find a tall man dressed in black standing in the doorway. He was holding a jagged knife in one hand and an empty container of sulfuric acid in the other. Halloween mask. There was a boy named Lenny who really loved Halloween. It was his favorite holiday and he always tried to celebrate it in style. Every year, he would save up his money and buy the best mask, the best costume, the best decorations. This year was no different. Lenny was getting ready to go to a Halloween party at his friend's house. He got dressed up in a shaggy black coat, big black boots and a long, flowing cape. Then, he put on his Halloween mask and admired himself in the mirror. It was the scariest, most hideous mask he had ever seen. He was sure that everyone at the party would be terrified when they set eyes on it. He would be the envy of all his friends. When Lenny turned up at his friend's house, the party was already in full swing. He could hear the dull sound of music coming from behind the door. He rang the doorbell and his friend answered it. She greeted him and ushered him inside. He looked around the living room. Some people were dancing and others were talking, laughing, drinking and nibbling at the buffet. There were witches, ghosts, skeletons, vampires and zombies. None of the masks were very scary. Lenny was sure he had the best one. He stood there and waited for someone to comment on his mask, but nobody paid any attention to him. He was disappointed. Wandering around the room, he tried to give everyone a good view of the mask. He wanted them to be scared. He wanted to cause a stir. One girl tapped him on the shoulder and started talking to him. "Hey, who are you supposed to be?" she asked. Lenny tried to reply, but he found he couldn't move his mouth. The mask felt too tight. He was embarrassed, so he turned away and went into the kitchen to get himself a glass of Halloween punch. He tried to pull off his mask so he could take a drink, but it wouldn't budge. It seemed to be stuck fast to his face. He pulled and tugged on it, but no matter what he did, he couldn't get it off. Lenny was starting to get worried. It was hot inside the house and Lenny could feel himself sweating under the mask. He needed to get it off. He needed to get it off now. Grabbing a knife from the kitchen drawer, he went into the toilet and locked the door behind him. He looked in the mirror and started scratching and tearing at the mask, but it really hurt. It was as if the mask was firmly stuck to his skin. Getting desperate, he took the knife as sliced into the mask, cutting off little strips of rubber and tossing them into the sink. Gradually, a queue formed outside the toilet and people started getting impatient, knocking on the door and calling out, "What's going on in there?" Lenny was in a panic and he tried peeling off the rest of the mask, but it stubbornly stayed in place. He couldn't understand what was wrong. What if it won't come off? He wondered. What if it's stuck on my face forever? He began hacking at the mask with the knife again and ripping off little bits. More and more people were banging on the door. "Come on!" they shouted. "What are you doing in there?" From inside the toilet, they heard Lenny shrieking, "It won't come off. My mask. It won't come off." The people gathered outside the toilet gave each other worried looks. One of the girls was puzzled. "Mask," she said. But he wasn't wearing a mask.